May I kindly ask participants to register for this meeting? There's a registration link from the chat. I know some colleagues have already started registering, which is great. Those who are still to register, please attend to the link. We are honored to have such a distinguished group of participants. Mostly we have graduate students with core participation of our SASCA Graduate Studies Program and Integrated Water Resources Management PhD students. We appreciate and acknowledge our Namibian University of Science and Technology and SASCA leadership and student supervisors who managed to join us this morning. We are also joined by participants from our partners and collaborators, including the larger community of NAST, Botswana University of Agriculture and Natural Resources, University of Botswana, NEPAD, Stellenbosch University Access. We also have participants from the University of Zambia. We also have colleagues from WaterNet, among others. We are very excited, colleagues, to have you, as always. A big thank you to you, NAST, our largest SASCA leadership, SASCA Graduate Studies Program in Integrated Water Resources Management Secretariat, all collaborating partners of different dimensions and levels, and all support structures of the SGSP IWRM program. Today's event promises to be an engaging and enlightening experience for all of us, especially the students. As much as we are going to have a dedicated question and answer session, feel free to interject during the presentation as the need might be. The concept of our research publication clinic is a flagship initiative of the SGSP IWRM that will be conducted annually to help especially graduate students to understand the ins and outs of scientific and academic writing for efficient communication and impactful and accelerated publications. This coaching clinic is a great opportunity for participants to gain insights and get refreshed from experts and improve their scientific writing skills and packaging of research findings for diverse public domains. This particular one, the inaugural SGSP IWM Research Publication Clinic, will particularly cover various topics but anchored around logical manuscript structure, efficient publishing strategy, and successful journal submission. The objectives of the clinic as articulated on the agenda are: 1, to familiarize participants with the different types of articles published by journals and their structure and scope. Secondly, to introduce participants to stages of developing a manuscript for publishing. And third, to capacitate participants on creating and implementing an efficient publication strategy for quick and impactful publishing. We hope it will be possible to follow this up with a master's class next year. We are thus grateful to have a guest from one of the top tiers and reputable publishers in Springer, who will be the main speaker for our research publication clinic. Ladies and gentlemen, allow me to introduce the main speaker of today, Dr. Fries Schum. Dr. Fries is currently the chief publisher at the Springer Nature's Mathematics, Physical and Applied Science Journal Division. He is responsible for driving forward the commissioning, content management, and development of a portfolio of international environmental sciences journals across 3 broad cores: environmental studies, sustainable development, and cleaner production, with a specific focus on trans and interdisciplinary research. His research interests are in environmental economics, management and policy, environmental law and politics, environmental assessment, environmental and occupational health, air and water quality, hydrogeology, and water resources. Dr. Fries has also indicated that he is available for one-on-one follow-ups, even outside this webinar. Dr. Fries, thank you for agreeing to conduct this research publication clinic for us. We are very honored to have you here, sir. Dr. Fries, let me allow you to take us through the presentation. Thank you, colleagues. Dr. Fries?
He's muted. He's on mute.
Okay. Can you hear me now?
Yes, now we can hear you.
Good morning, everybody. Thank you to Professor Malafi for this wonderful invitation. I'm really delighted to meet all of you. As a publisher, it of course is not only important for us to publish the wonderful research that is sent to us. It also is important to help authors through the entire process. Therefore, I take great delight in giving author workshops, especially to masters and PhD students, when you're very much at the beginning of your publishing career, and there is a lot to learn about the ins and outs of publishing. It will be a very dense and highly informative workshop that I give today, showing a lot of slides. So in advance, I want to apologize for going through a lot of them at great speed. But as Professor Malafi said at the beginning, there is time to contact me afterwards. We also will have a Q&A. But for now, let me start on showing you the presentation. And just 1 second, because I'm not super familiar with Teams. So I'm not going to be able to see you from now on. So can somebody just indicate that they can see my screen?
Yes, we can. Thank you. Yes, we
can.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Wonderful. And then also, if I move to the next one, can you see this?
Yes, we can see, Doc.
Yes.
Okay. Wonderful, thank you. Okay, if there's at any point there's a problem with the slides, because sometimes these links work up to a point in moving the slides, just let me know. Okay, so first of all, when publishing your work, it's not only about getting your article into a journal, getting it published, and that's the end of that. As an author, you also have an extremely important task, and that is to be an effective communicator that works throughout the process, from submitting an article through to the process of getting the article through review, the revision process. But importantly, also once your article is published, your role as an author doesn't stop. It actually, there's a new component added to that, and that is how to communicate your work effectively. As I say, the goal is not only to get published, but also to be widely read in your field. And therefore, it's important to, from the very beginning, from the very first time that you start writing an article, to learn how to go through the entire process to promote your work, but also help promote what you do in the in your research. We'll go through 3 main sections with some subsections in the workshop. First of all, you'll see how to create a logical manuscript structure that best reflects what you do in your work. Then how to develop an efficient publication strategy to allow you to present your work to a journal, then take it through the peer review process, and then after publication, then take it to all the relevant audiences that you have in mind. So this is what we're going to do today. We're going to look at some of the article types. I just sketched the 3 parts here, and then we'll go to the Q&A at the end. On the article types, as PhD and master students, at this point, you probably only focused on the very first part, which is original research. That is the most common type. That is the majority of what we publish in journal articles.
Sorry, Doc, sorry for the interjection. There was a hand up.
Yes, please. But do remember, I can't see if anybody puts a hand up, but please go ahead with a question.
Yes, colleague, go ahead with your interjection. Maybe it was unintentional. Okay.
Okay.
Okay. So
Okay, that's fine. So the bulk of what you will see in academic journals will be regional research. This is the most traditional, the most classical type of depositing your research in an article that has a structure that we will cover in the workshop. So I won't spend too much time on the range of article types because as a master's and PhD student, you probably will not engage in any of these at this point. But at a later point in your career, it also depends a little bit on what kind of article types journals allow, because some journals, for instance, review journals, only allow for review articles. Most journals will have a mix of this, focusing mostly on the regional research. The short reports or letters usually cover a very small part of research project, or is a comment on trends in research that gets reported to journal. Review articles are very important because review articles will review an entire body of knowledge, focusing on research across a larger time span. We'll look at everything that got published on a certain topic, and we'll have a systematic review and analysis of what those articles contributed to the overall body of knowledge. These are articles that also at the beginning of your career you're not likely to write yourself, because it does require a very deep insight and a lot of expertise in the field. However, as a student, the review articles are particularly important for you during your studies because they allow a very quick yet very deep entry into a field or topic that you may not be particularly familiar with. Please note they are quite distinct from the literature review that you have to do as part of your thesis. There you don't go as deeply, you don't make a comparative analysis as deeply as one would in a review article. But as a student, I really would advise you to look at as many review articles as you can for different topics, because they do allow for a very quick yet very deep entry into a topic or a field. The case studies are self-explanatory. A lot of journals, however, don't necessarily want case studies because case studies on the whole tend to capture a bit of research, but on the whole don't really go very deeply on the analytical side. And for that reason, a lot of journals are not particularly interested in having case studies. Methodologies or methods articles, these often are either an addendum to or in addition to regional research articles, where in an original research article, you only have a limited space to focus on methodology. Methodologies articles you find only in some disciplines, particularly in applied sciences, where there is a need to go much deeper into what the methodology is than what you can deposit in the regional research article. Editorials are usually written for instance, for a special issue. So that's something you only do if you become a guest editor for a special issue. And then commentaries, or as written here, comments, these are often written as a response to a published article to expand a little bit on something or to add a little bit of new knowledge. That's the kind of article where usually one gets in touch with the journal to ask whether the journal will accept a commentary and whether a commentary to a specific article will be accepted. Okay, let's move on now to what is going to be the biggest part of today's publication clinic: how to create a manuscript structure that both fits into the scope of a journal, but very importantly also will allow you to present your research that you've done that comes out of a specific project in the best possible manner. Whenever you write an article, these will be the 4 key questions that you have to ask yourself in depositing your research, into shaping your research into a structure that can go into an article, but also the kind of questions that as a reader you ask when you approach an article of somebody else. Point number 1, explaining why you did this study. What was the need for the study beforehand? What was the gaps in knowledge? Was there a specific project that caused you to decide to write an article? Then how you went about doing your research, the methodology that you developed, or the methodology that the existing methodology that you used and perhaps amended in the study. Then your research results, and then finally, when you've put forward the analytical part of your article, explaining also how this study advances the field. What is the knowledge that you add to the field that may not have been there before? Is this an incremental change, incremental addition to the knowledge that you add, or is this a big leap in the knowledge? Is this something completely new that was not done before? And these 4 questions will come back to a few times. So bear in mind, this is the kind of thing that is good to revisit a few times. Why did the study is going to be shown in your introduction. Then you're going to have your methodology section, you'll have the results section and the discussion. Depending on what the journal structure is, these 4 sections will by and large be, regardless of the field, also the kind of structure that practically every journal will require of you when we're talking about an original research article. And starting off with the introduction, it's very important to distill from a very wide point down to a very narrow point what the aims are of the research that you did. You start off by sketching the broad departure point, the broad aims of the research project, and distill that down to the single point that caused you to write this specific article. In introducing the topic, it is important to ask yourself, what is the audience that you're trying to capture for this? If it is a topic that has relevance beyond a very small group, and the small group could be a very small research community that you want to capture, if the research findings have application value beyond a regional aspect, or it goes beyond the disciplinary boundaries that you're working in, then you should start placing that immediately within a context that will have a global applicability. But then again, it could be that you are writing for a very specific audience, only a very small part within your disciplinary field, and that will very much determine how you position your article and how you position the content of what you will be writing about. Important next step is to position your research within a wider body of knowledge. Show how your knowledge fits within the bigger body. Are you looking at a very finely grained amount of knowledge that you want to put forward? Is this something that you want to put into a wider context? And then, quite importantly, to very clearly describe what the research is about, and to put that within the context of what already is out there. A research article always becomes part of a much bigger body of knowledge, so you have to sketch the body of knowledge that exists at this point, and then add on what you're going to do in your own research. And with that, going through these steps, you get to the point where the aims that preceded the research project that you started, that you can then very clearly articulate what those were and distill them down to what your article is going to be about. For the methodology, it's very important to sketch that in a very clear fashion. If this is methodology that is newly developed, you have to indicate why methodology that is out there did not apply in this case. Because the main thing about methodology in an article, and that applies to whatever field you're working in, is that your results always have to be reproducible. That is one of the main tenets of publishing research, that reproducibility is always going to be a key factor. And for that, methodology is key, especially when you are engaging in new methodology. So ask yourself, in terms of the researchers in your field, can you, when you show the reproducibility of your findings, is it done in a manner that is well understood and that links up to the knowledge that is out there at this point? Very important also, when discussing your methodology, you're going to be focusing on two different audiences. One, in the published article, you're going to be focusing on the researchers in the field. But importantly, because your article at this point is going to be submitted to a journal and then sent out to peer reviewers, is that for peer reviewers, there should be great clarity in how you designed the study, how you applied methodology, existing methodology, and or how you develop new methodology. And very importantly, how that methodology can then be used to validate the results that you present in the journal. A lot about the publication process is not only about looking ahead at the published product, at the published content that will be shown in the journal. A lot of that you also have to keep in mind, and we'll cover that later on in the peer review process. A lot of that also has to do with the fact that your work will now be read, first of all, by the journal, and then it will be read by peer reviewers. And that is the first step at making a credible impression about the validity of your research, the importance of your research, and the importance of your findings. So when starting out to write an article, always keep these two audiences in mind. The peer reviewers will be involved in your article for a short period, but they're going to be the key first audience, because without the peer reviewers, there won't be a published article. So bear in mind at any point that you have to be as articulate as possible in what you do, leaving out any vagueness or doubts in what you write. So on the methods, first of all, ask yourself what your readers need to know about your research, not what they might know themselves as researchers, but what they need to know about your research specifically. So you have to be very clear in what you used in your study, and if you use human participants in the study, who they are, very clear identification in terms of the type of human participants, and if no human participants are used, what kind of materials did you use? If you're looking at specific samples, what were they? A very clear description of what those are. We discussed this already about the methodology, but again, a very clear description of how your study was conducted, how the methodology was chosen, how that fit into what you were doing, the techniques you used in the research, and then the specific conditions and controls under which you were operating when you were engaged in your research. In looking at how you analyze your data, it is important to sketch also the methods and the software that you used. When submitting an article, there are a couple of boxes you have to check and fill in information. A very important one of them is also about data availability. Increasingly, more and more journals are requiring authors to very clearly show whether the data that they collected can be made available. So some journals increasingly move now to the point where you actually have to add the database. A lot of journals give the opportunity for that, where you can add as electronic supplementary material. You can upload your data. In some cases, this is proprietary data. For instance, if you were contracted by an outside firm to do that, and that data is then owned by the firm and can't be shared, that's fine. But that's a statement that you also then have to make, whether the data is available or not. And if it's not available, then it is important also to give an indication, for instance, in the case of proprietary data, to give a description of the fact that it is not available and why. On the statistical tests, you may yourself not have a huge statistical basis to do. In that case, it is important to have your data validated by a statistician. And in some cases, you may have to consider having such a researcher join you as a co-author in the paper. As a PhD student, of course, you'll get the guidance from your supervisor on that. Once you've finished your PhD, do ask colleagues whether it is important to have, for instance, a statistician join you as a co-author in your article. So then moving on to the results section. Again, here, as in the rest of the paper, there is a structure that is very important to follow in order to present your results in the clearest manner possible. First of all, to peer reviewers, and then subsequently to readers, to other researchers. You start out with the initial observation that either led to the research, or the initial observations that were just done at the very outset of the research. Following that, characterization of results, and then finally application. In this part, you sketch how the knowledge that was generated in this project can be applied in a specific setting or in different settings. It is not always about having positive results. We'll get that a little bit later on. Sometimes a research project can yield either largely or mostly negative results. That is not a reason not to write an article. And importantly, that's the kind of information that's also very valid to add to an article, because even if you have negative outcomes in your research, it is important to share that with the research community, because that's part of building a body of knowledge. That avenue A is a successful one, avenue B is not. But then importantly, if it is a negative result, also indicate why this negative result, what was found in that, because that also helps prevent researchers from either taking that route, or they can build on the fact that they themselves had a negative result in that. As an example, and this is applicable to your field, the outcome was that a new membrane was developed for water treatment. The characterization of that was that you use that to evaluate physical and chemical properties under different conditions, and then show the application value, that it was particularly effective in removing particulate contamination. But in looking at the negative results, it also is important to say, especially if at the beginning you indicated this is what we're looking at, if A, B, and C were your hope for outcomes, and it turns out A and B was a successful outcome, but C not, do add C as well, because as I explained before, the even negative results do form a very important part of the body of knowledge that you'll be contributing to. Within your article, you're going to add tables and figures. These are often as important as the textual elements, and sometimes much more important, because the visual elements often will serve as a little mini abstract or a mini analytical part in your article. And it's usually important to pay particular attention to the graphical elements that you're going to add in your article. Here too, it works a little bit in the way that the rest of your manuscript structure works, that you introduce what you're going to do, you discuss the trends and relationships of the whole process, and importantly, you can also show key findings here as well. In the discussion in the last part of your article, very important, here you very clearly dive into and demonstrate how your study contributes to the body of knowledge that you're working on, to the field, to the topic. Earlier on, I showed you an inverted pyramid where you work from a wide set of aims and distill that down to the aims that you are presenting in your article. Here it works a little bit broader. You work from the top point of the pyramid will be your analytical findings, and then you present that within a context of wider applicability outside of the immediate focus of what you're doing. What are the broader outcomes of your research? What are the broader implications? And here you can also start adding what you the further research avenues that are opened up by your article. I mentioned earlier the importance of interpreting your findings not only in the positive outcomes, but also showing the negative results, the unexpected results, because those too could be new avenues for research. But in summary, what your discussion section will look like, you start once again briefly describing what the research focus was, what the research problem was. Then you briefly describe again the methodology that you used. How did you go about creating the study design, and then linking onto that the key findings that came out of your research project. But importantly, you don't just give a short summary, a short narrative, going from the outset of your research problem through to methodology and the findings. Importantly, and this is also one of the key factors in considering which journal you're going to be focusing on, what your audiences are, you also have to interpret the findings, make a bridge between the similarities that you found in other research that looked at the same topic, or importantly the differences, because the differences could also then be opening up new avenues for research. Again, as I've mentioned before, show the unexpected or the negative results, because this is a very key part for other researchers to understand how your research function, what you found, and then importantly also to sketch what the limitations are. In any kind of research project, your focus can be quite narrow. That means that certain findings simply wouldn't be expected to be in there. That is completely fine. Sketch what those were. And if the outcomes of your research only focus on a very narrow part, also indicate that, because no bit of research is intended to solve issues that lie very much outside of the scope of what you did. And then, as important, to come up with a main conclusion about what you did that links back again to what your research problem was at the very beginning, and then the wider implications and applicability of your research. So here, just in summary, how the entire manuscript structure starts out from the very beginning. On the left-hand side here, you see the 4 questions that I posed very much at the beginning. Why it needs to be done. In that, you work through the introduction of the topic. You link that up to what the body of knowledge looks like at the moment, all the research that already got published. from that, you derive what the problem is that you're going to be looking at. Then on the left-hand side, again, what you did, which includes the objectives, the methodology, the study design. Looking at the left side again, your results, what you found, and then importantly, how your study will advance the field, articulating very clearly what the findings were that came out of the study and what the implications of the field is. So if you now have a good idea of what the entire structure of a paper is, it's important to look a little bit at from the top down the other elements that you're going to be introducing. Titles are extremely important because the titles show up in various ways. First of all, the title is going to be at the very top of your article in the published version. But the title also leads a little bit of a life outside of the article itself. In a table of contents in the published version of a journal, you're only going to see the title, read the scan through that. That's the first thing that can get anybody's attention. So you need to have an article title that is as focused and as concise as possible to get anybody's attention. Remember also in indexing services where the content of the journal is indexed, we're thinking of Science Citation Index, Web of Science, Scopus, Google Scholar. Think back, you look at a screen with 25 titles or however many, already there is a very important point to get to readers' attention as quickly and as concisely as possible. So consider this from the very beginning. What should you include in the title? Obviously, the main thrust of what you're doing. In some fields, in humanities and social sciences, quite often see that a more prosaic title is used. In the fields that you're working in, that is not advised because it's simply not the habit to do that. It is very much a key issue to use as a departure point, only use keywords taken from the body of your article. To put those together, because the keywords, when an article gets indexed in abstracting services, they immediately are the main hooks onto which searchers will hang. So it's very important to be very focused on what you do and also to be quite concise. Don't go for very long articles. A lot of indexing services also have a cutoff point of between 15 and 22 keywords. So try and keep that as short as possible. What is not good to do is don't pose a research question or any kind of point that you're trying to solve in your research as a title. Also, try and really be as articulate and as focused as possible, and not leave any doubt as to what you're trying to achieve with your research. And importantly, don't use any kind of jargon or abbreviations. Even though you might be writing for a very specialized audience, it could be that some of the technical jargon that you use in the article is not known to everybody. Don't introduce that in your title. So very clearly state what you're trying to investigate. I used earlier the example of the water membrane. If that's going to be the main thrust of what you do, include that. Include perhaps a little bit of the findings as well. But do be careful on this, that you don't become too descriptive in what you do and also too long. The second part that in most journal articles that you'll see after the title in the published version will be the abstract. Importantly is never to start writing an abstract before your article is done. Make notes for yourself or writing the article, but don't write the article when you set out to do in a very linear fashion, starting with the title, then the abstract, then the introduction, then methodology, then analysis and findings. Instead, you do it slightly the other way around. You do the body of your article, then you write your title, then you write your abstract. I mentioned earlier on the abstract, keep notes while you're writing an article for both the abstract and the title, but don't start at that point, because it could be that by the end of your article, you want to change your title and your abstract substantially. So do this at the end. The abstract is in fact going to be a mini article. That's why it's also so important to do this at the end and not at the beginning, because your abstract is going to have broadly the structure, leaving out perhaps some elements of methodology, but it's going to have the broad thrust of what you do in the body text. And it has 3 key points as shown here. First of all, why is this topic important? Why was this bit of research important? Think of how this will lead other researchers to new insights, what it will present to them, how it will enable them to further their own research. Try and articulate that as best as you can. Secondly, demonstrate what is the significance of what you did and the significance of the findings that came out of the article. Again, I mentioned earlier, you may end up with negative results. Don't shy away from even adding in that, because that is a very important part of advancing knowledge as well. And then finally, the relevance of your research. The abstract is admittedly one of the most difficult things that you can write, because in one sense it is a summary of your full article, but much more difficult than that to achieve in the short space that you will have available. Is that this also is the if I can use the term, this is the promotional part of what you do. Bear in mind that when you that not only for the published version, but when you submit an article, the abstract is going to be by far the biggest thing that will catch the eye of a researcher. Especially on journals that receive an extremely high volume of papers. The abstract can sometimes be the point that will either that will be the tipping point of allowing an editor to very quickly assess whether this is not only within the aims and scope of a journal, but also whether there is sufficient originality of your research. To allow the editor to consider reading through an entire article before deciding whether this article will be put into peer review or not, as the case may be. So once you've finished your article, really do spend a sufficient amount of time on creating the best abstract that you can. Also, send your abstract to researchers you know very well, researchers who also had published a number of articles, and ask them, does this catch your eye? Does this resonate? Do you think this is the kind of thing that will resonate with the journal? So spend a good amount of time on this. Delving a little bit deeper into what I just sketched now, it is important to demonstrate yet once again, even though you've just done that in the main body of the article, to demonstrate to your readers, and your readers, remember, are going to be the editor-in-chief of a journal, the peer reviewers, and then subsequently, if your article is published, the other researchers. Demonstrate again why the study needed to be done. And and with that, you have to introduce once again the relevancy of the research project and what was original about what you did, what was new, what was not done before. Briefly again, sketching the aims and methodology, yet you don't go very deeply into this here. Especially if you have new methodology, don't go into a long-winded explanation about that. You just sketch what it is, and then jump to what the key results were. And as was the case in the main body of the text, come up with the main conclusion and what the implications are for the body of knowledge that you're trying to contribute to. What is the other avenues that you've opened up potentially with your own research. Now we're going to take a little bit of a sidestep. And this is not about how you create a manuscript structure that fits the aims and scope of a specific journal, but this is going to be a short description, yet a very important one, about how you should go about throughout your research, then writing up the results of your research and presenting that, things that you should keep in mind. As publishers, we are confronted with quite a lot of ethical misconduct when it comes to research. It is a very important part for all journals, for the editors, for the peer reviewers, for me as a publisher, to check the validity of what is presented to us, and then also to be sure that what is presented to us really are the true and valid outcomes of the research that was done by the authors, and that that research really is their own work. Here you see a very nice statement on to describe what scientific misconduct could be, and that is very much what we discover, or what we confronted with when research is submitted to us for publication in journals. That there's a very broad spectrum of scientific misconduct. Some of them can be really very simple and honest errors, unintended errors. I can mention one example that I see quite frequently, especially with younger researchers. That is that short text was taken from a published piece, or from perhaps an unpublished master's or PhD thesis, or from a report that was found on the internet, and unfortunately the reference was not added to that in the paper. That could be a mistake, but it could also be quite conscious that was done. If it's conscious, then we're moving into the very much into the arena of plagiarism. And then on the other side of the spectrum, we're looking at outright fraud, when we have cases of data falsification, or data that was taken from somebody else's research project but was not referenced at all. So it's very broad scope of misconduct that we can see, but the very important thing is it is highly important to be aware in your research, and then subsequently in writing up the results in an article, to be mindful of how anything that you put in an article is presented, and what the wider context of that is. On a smaller end, there could be, for instance, an undeclared conflict of interest that you have. You are doing the same kind of research as somebody else, yet you don't make mention of that. You work together with somebody, yet not referencing anything that they did. That is quite important. When submitting an article, you have to tick a couple of boxes I mentioned earlier, quite a few, and one of them also is on conflicts of interest. You could be working with another group presenting this research. You have to indicate whether they are part of that or not. A wider one is on disputed authorship. You write an article with a group of people, you submit an article, but not everybody was involved in the research, are shown as authors in the paper. It is important when you submit an article, you get asked who all the authors are. You have to supply all the information of everybody, and you have to provide a declaration that says everybody listed as authors here agreed to be listed as authors. That is a very important point. On the more serious end of the spectrum, we're looking, for instance, at plagiarism, taking over content published by another researcher, but not referencing that, not indicating that it is their content that you're adding to your article. Duplicate publication is a very important one. Every single journal that you will ever submit to will ask you to state at the beginning, when you submit an article, that you are submitting your content to this journal only. It is not being reviewed elsewhere by another journal, and also it is not being published elsewhere. That is an increasingly big problem, especially when researchers want to have a very quick way to getting an article published. Then sometimes they decide to submit to different journals at the same time. And then the first journal that will accept the article, that's the one they go for. That is a very, very serious case of misconduct, because with every single journal that you'll ever submit to, that is a fixed rule across all journals, that you can only submit to one journal at a time, and you have to go through the process there before you can submit to another journal in case your article gets rejected. And then very much at the most serious part of the whole spectrum of scientific misconduct, that would be on data fabrication and data falsification. Here too, it is especially when the pressure as a researcher becomes bigger and bigger to publish more and quicker. Here sometimes it can be a very easy way to get to the point of publication, to just slightly change data to fit the outcomes. At some point it is detected, because as I mentioned at the very beginning, a huge part of the presenting your results, showing methodology, is that what you did in your research should be reproducible. You should demonstrate that it's reproducible in your article. So with any kind of data fabrication, falsification, at some point, either during the peer review process or sometimes years after publication of your article, it can be detected. And if it's detected at that point, you still can get a retraction of your article, which is the worst thing that can happen. So be mindful of all of this. I mentioned this before. For every journal article, the fixed rule is that the work that is submitted has not been published elsewhere before. It also is not being submitted and being peer reviewed at any other journal. You have to indicate that all the co-authors and the responsible authorities, that could be the funders, that could be the institute where you're working at that point, that all of them have approved what is being done. We're looking for instance, also at whether if you need ethical sign-off beforehand, especially if you're working, for instance, with human participants, that you received ethical sign-off beforehand. These are all statements that you have to supply when you submit your article. Fourth point, permissions have been obtained in case you have you using parts of previously published work in your article, or graphical elements, tables, that you receive the permission from the copyright owners to include that in your article. And also there will be a statement at some point on data validity, data availability. It's important to look at that. Now, increasingly, journals, and at this point, if I talk about Spring and Nature, we're looking at the vast majority of our journals. When content is submitted to the article, it goes through an automatic software check. The system that we use, it's a system that's used very widely. It's called Authenticate. There are other software systems the different journals use. And that is a system that looks at whether your article shows any kind of similarity with published research elsewhere. It's very powerful software. It can detect either repeated keywords that you use, strings of text. It can also look at graphical elements. It looks at who the authors are in your article and what they published elsewhere. It's a very powerful piece of software to check whether any part of your research shows similarity with anything else. So once again, it is very important, even if you think it is a very benign way to just copy a few sentences from somebody else's article and not put a reference in. Authenticate will definitely make a discovery of that. So be very, very careful in ensuring that all references or permissions are added. If you have a master's thesis that was put in your university's repository and that repository is publicly accessible, Authenticate will pick that up. So plagiarism is not only limited to taking over parts of other people's research, not referencing that. There's also something called self-plagiarism. If you had published an article, or you take it from a report that was uploaded to the internet, or from a PhD thesis or a master's thesis in your university's repository. If you use elements from those sources and not reference that, even if it's your own work that you produce there, that is self-plagiarism, and that is also something that is frowned upon very seriously and can lead to your work being rejected or worse. So do keep very much in mind what you're doing there. Okay, a rather long explanation on how to create a manuscript structure. Moving on now to looking at what your publishing strategy could be, because at the very outset I mentioned that it's not only about putting together the base article that you have, submitting that to a journal. You also need to be a very good communicator to the journal you're going to be submitting to. And then later on, we're also going to look at how to be a communicator once your article is published, because the research outputs that you have to create now as a PhD student or subsequently as an academic or researcher, it does not begin and end with writing an article, getting it through peer review and publishing it. There are more important steps to consider in this regard as well. For any kind of research that you're sending to a research, obviously it is very much important to look at how quickly you can publish that work, how quickly you can get your work to the researcher communities that you have in mind. But it is also important to create impact for what you do. And the impact starts very much when you start writing your article and you keep in mind how to position that work when you submit that to a journal, because submitting that to a journal is also very much about selling your work, showing what the validity is, showing what the importance is of what your findings are, and showing what the impact is, and then subsequently leveraging the impact of what you publish. You will know at this point about the impact factors that journals have, but quite often it is important not to look at the impact factor, but instead of what the impact is of your article only. The impact factor of a journal is a metric that is used to look at how often articles are cited, but that does not mean that the articles themselves can be impactful. When you submit to a journal, you look at different things. As an academic, yes, the impact factor is going to be very important, but when you submit to a journal, you're obviously looking at creating the widest impact, and some of that impact cannot be described in terms of the impact factor. I publish in the journal portfolio that I manage. I publish journals that all are very important in terms of the professional communities and practitioners. And the professional and practitioner communities often are people that don't publish themselves. So it means that in terms of an impact factor, a lot of the articles cannot be measured in what kind of impact they created by looking at the impact factor. Instead, one has to look at whether there was application value of that article. If I look at the fields that you are doing your research on, that's a very good example of the kind of fields that you want to look at in terms of professional practitioner communities. So do not confuse the impact factor necessarily with the biggest impact that your article can create. In trying to figure out what kind of impact you want to create, first of all, you start looking at what your target audience is. Are you looking at a specific regional audience? Are you is the research that you just completed, does that have a regional focus, or do you want to reach a global audience? Do you think there's application value that goes beyond the regional audience? That is already key for something we'll cover just now, which is how to decide what kind of journal you're trying to focus on. Secondly, very important is, are you trying to reach a very specialized audience only within your own research community, or are there audiences adjacent to that who might benefit from what you did? Also, are the audiences that you are trying to reach, where are they positioned at this point? Are these predominantly research audience? Are they academics? Are you looking instead perhaps at policymakers who might translate what you did into impactful policies? Are you looking at the general public? Are you looking at tutors? Are you looking at professors at universities who have students? Or is there a mix? Because even if there's a mix, that will very much determine what kind of audience you have. The relevance of your findings will dictate to a large degree what you will decide on when looking at what kind of journal would be the best platform and would create the best audiences for you. You will choose an international journal if you think your research has very wide application value beyond regional or beyond a specific geographical focus. However, if you're looking at an audience that you want to capture that has a much more limited spread, but where the impact will be the biggest, if you focus on that regional audience, then you can perhaps look at a journal that has a similar focus, only capturing a number of regional audiences. I'll go back to this slide because quite often, especially for researchers starting out, there often is the feeling that when you start publishing, it has to be for a global audience, that impact comes only if you have a global audience. By no means is that true. So when you start publishing, either as a PhD student or as a postdoc, as a young researcher, do reach out to the researchers in your community, to more senior researchers, to ask them what is the best way to create impact with an article. Sometimes we get in articles in our journals where we realize that the findings of an article is of immense importance. The article will be accepted for peer review, but that the journal that it is being positioned to now is not the correct one. And it can work either way. Either a journal with a very global focus can decide that there is a regional aspect that needs to be emphasized, Perhaps that may result in an article having to be rewritten slightly, and then the journal will advise that the journal is scientifically sound. This is good research, but we're not the right journal for you. Focus on a regional journal, perhaps, where you'll get much greater impact. But it also happens the other way around, where a journal with a regional focus will say, I think this is work that will benefit more from being positioned to a global audience, therefore consider doing a wider journal for that. In addition to that, it is important to look at how finely grained your work is. Is it work that is very much targeted at a highly specialized audience only? In that case, try and find a journal that is as narrow as possible. But it could be the case that the application value of your article goes beyond what a specialized audience should see. In that case, go for what is called here broad-focused journals. We sometimes also call those broad church journals, and those would often be journals that have a more interdisciplinary nature. In my own portfolio, I can mention two journals that are quite valid in this case. I publish quite a lot of water-focused journals, but then sometimes we get research published, submitted to those journals that are of a much more interdisciplinary nature. And in cases like that, then we'll advise to focus on a journal that will give you the kind of interdisciplinary audiences that you will need. Especially when you're writing with a number of co-authors, and those authors don't all come from the same field, especially if your article is written with a number of by a number of authors that constitute a very interdisciplinary group of authors. In those cases, it is important to look at journals that have a much broader focus than only the field or the discipline that you're working in at the moment. Once you've established what kind of global or local footprint a journal has, and what kind of audience that you are focusing on, be that a very specialized or be that interdisciplinary audience, the next thing that you have to look at is what kind of publishing model a journal uses. That'll be one of two things. The traditional journals are the subscription-based journals. That is where you almost always, certainly at Springer Nature, that's the case, where if you submit to a subscription-based journal, there will be no publication fee of any kind. Your publication will be free of charge. But in order for readers to have access to the journal, that will have to go through a subscription. And that could mean the case that either they have a subscription themselves to the journal, or the institute to which they belong will have access to the journal. Or it could be that an article is accessed on a pay-per-view basis. In addition to that, you have open access journals where the content will be permanently and freely accessible to anybody. But that does mean that an article processing charge, and so a fee, will be paid to render the article as open access. In that case, the copyright will be fully owned by the authors. Sometimes it will mean that the copyright will be owned by the institute. That depends very much on the rules of your institute. In the case of a subscription-based journal, the copyright mostly will be held in the name of the publisher, or if it is a society journal, it will be held in the name of the society. But in addition to these two models, subscription-based and open access, you also have, and that is becoming one of the most prevalent types of journal models, you will have hybrid, where you can either publish your article for free and then it will go down the subscription route, or you can have your article published as open access in a journal. But for open access, it's important to first look at what the conditions are. A smaller number of journals will say that from certain countries you can get a waiver, meaning the article processing charge that will have to be paid to render your article open access will either be paid in full by the journal or waived in full or in part. So it's important to check beforehand, do you have the funding for that? Maybe your institute has funding for that. Maybe your institute or your university is participating in a compact agreement that a lot of institutes have with journals, with publishers, whereby the APC is not payable. Do check that beforehand, because when an article is accepted and you have to choose your publication model, it is important to know beforehand whether you can choose the open access or not. For open access, it is quite important to check the journal that you are submitting to. Unfortunately, there are a lot of predatory journals about where they promise to, for a fee, the fee can in some cases be a small fee in case of predatory journals, where they promise to publish your article very quickly, so peer review is done very, very quickly, and then your article is published. In most cases, the sad thing is that your article will actually not be peer reviewed. You might get comments from the journal, but these are what are called rogue publishers who just are in the game really to make a quick buck, publish your work, but your work will almost certainly have no impact, because these are very obscure journals that sometimes are very difficult to find. So first of all, check if you are aiming for an open access journal that you are published by a reputable publisher, and I'll show in a minute how that can be done. In addition to being a reputable publisher, by default, the content of these publishers will also be published in databases and the abstracting and indexing services that are well known, such as Web of Science, Scopus, PubMed, and a whole range of other abstracting and indexing services. Important in all of these cases is that the fee to pay is done at the end, after your article has been accepted, and not upfront. Quite a lot of the rogue publishers will make a very attractive offer to you to publish your work, but then require you to pay that upfront. In some cases, that's the last you will hear of the publisher, so be quite mindful when you do that. And then also a reputable open access journal will give quite a lot of information about the journal itself. It will, for instance, show who the editorial board members are. It will show details about who the publisher is. It will give quite a lot of detailed information about how the publisher can be contacted, located, etc. This is all information that you should readily and very easily find when you go onto the website of such a journal. Fortunately, there are very clear ways where you can quickly go and check whether an open access publisher is a reputable and a trustworthy one. If you go to this site at the bottom, thinkchecksubmit.org, there is a form that you can download, and you can check for yourself, what do I know about this journal? What do I know about this publisher? And having gone through all of this, if the vast majority of these boxes can be checked, then you have a fairly good idea that this is a reputable journal. This is quite an important thing to do, because increasingly now research funding, part of research funding earmarks an amount to also pay the APC to get an article to be open access. It is important not to be blinded by what a journal can offer you, but to really check very well whether you are working with a legitimate publisher, with a legitimate open access journal or not. So these are the main things we've worked on so far. first of all, we created a manuscript that is organized in a very consistent and logical manner. You have you have defined what would be the best journal, and now it comes the time when you have to submit your article. And admittedly, this is now the start of a very tense period. So do bear a couple of things in mind. First of all, journal editors are very busy people, especially on very large journals. They get a very high volume of articles that they have to consider whether these articles, first of all, fit the aims and scope of the journal. Secondly, whether the article is scientifically sound. Then whether it is the findings are reproducible, and importantly, is the research original enough to warrant the article to be published? Because bear in mind, you could have done really good research, you could have written a good article, but a journal editor may look at an article and think, well, we've published 100 or 200 articles in a similar vein. Very well done. Methodology was clearly described. The research focus was clearly described. We can really see how the research findings were arrived at. We can see what the validity is of everything, but it adds almost nothing, if anything, to the body of knowledge, because this is research that's been done countless number of times. So even if your article is extremely well organized, well written, you articulate everything as best as you could, the article may not necessarily be accepted. Therefore, it is also important to structure your work and then subsequently to present your work as best as possible. The vast majority of editors are not full-time journal editors. The vast majority of them will, for instance, be full-time professors, or they may have other kinds of duties, of which being a journal editor is only one thing. So you're looking at a lot of competition that you're going to have to face when you submit your article, because you're not the only one. I can give an example. One of my journals this year, we will probably get around about 8,000 articles submitted to the journal. Of that, we will publish less than 10%, maybe 11-12% in a good year. So the competition is going to be extremely stiff in what you do. One of the first points is, and most journals will require you to do this, you have to write a cover letter. The cover letter is going to be a very short and sharp presentation of the work. We discussed earlier the great importance of writing the best abstract you can. The cover letter, like the abstract, is going to be written after you've done everything. Your article is completely finished, and then you write your cover letter. Make notes as you go along for what you think could be put into a cover letter, but the cover letter itself is written at the end. And that is the first introduction that in a lot of journals, the editor will see even before anything about your article is going to be seen here. Again, the 4 questions that we had at the beginning, the 4 questions that were then reflected in the abstract, by and large, that's what you're going to repeat again here. So what you've done before is going to be quite a good exercise to once again repeat in your cover letter, sketching significance, sketching relevance of what you did, and very importantly now, and this is the first outcome of having looked at what is the best journal that you should be considering for your work. Here, you're going to make a link between your work and why it is suitable for this journal, why it is relevant, why it is applicable to this journal. We're going through the same process again as when we decided what is the logical manuscript structure that you're going to be working through. First of all, you introduce your manuscript. You show what the title is, and then, if relevant, you also say what the article type is. This is not super important because, especially if you do an original research article, you don't have to describe that, because in the cover letter that already will be clear to an editor that that's the point. But if your article type is different to original research, then it is very important to list that very clearly here, and then also to explain why you chose this article type and not something else. In one of the article types I showed you at the very beginning, the very last one was commentaries. If you have commentary articles are often very short, it can be limited to 1 or 2 A4s. If you write a commentary article and not a regional research piece, it is important to sketch that here, because the question might be, why didn't you go for a full regional research article instead only for commentaries article? You sketch the scope of your study subsequent to that, and very importantly, link that to the journal's scope. Every journal has an aims and scope statement on their website. It is very important to familiarize yourself with this aims and scope text, because you're going to be linking very concisely but very clearly the scope of your study to what the what the aims and scope of the journal will be. And here, study design and some of the conclusions in your article, you will link that also again to what the focus of the journal is going to be. And finally, the implications for the field and the conclusion. Once again, you have to link that to both the aims and scope of the journal, and importantly to the readership of the journal, because this is the final piece in which you indicate that your article not only has relevance in terms of the merits of your research, of your methodology, of your findings, but it has very specific merits in introducing new findings to the readership of the journal. And here, finally, if, for instance, there are some reviewers that need to be included or excluded, there could be some reviewers where you think there's a conflict of interest, somebody who were involved in the research, advice on the research, but were not listed as authors. Those are people who should not be reviewing your work, because they have very clear conflict of interest. That is something you could be mentioning here as well. So I mentioned already about the aims and scope of the journal that you have to familiarize yourself with, but you also have to look at what has been published in the journal to be very clear that not only does your work link up to the aims and scope of the journal, but that it resonates a little bit with what already has been published. If your work falls very much outside of the main thrust of what's being published in the journal, you already miss a very great opportunity in terms of time and relevance, because the journal might look at your work and say it is very valid research, it is sound research, but it doesn't link up at all in terms of what we do. So in addition to the aims and scope, also look at, is this the kind of work that already got published in the journal? If the answer is yes, then you stand a good chance of your work being accepted for review. If the answer is no, it still could be that your work will be of interest to the journal, but then you have to demonstrate very clearly what is so novel about your work that it merits being accepted for review in this journal, that it is groundbreaking for this journal, and that it therefore should be considered for publication. If you can't make that argument clearly, then it's also perhaps an idea to look at alternative journals that you may want to submit to. In addition to the aims and scope, do read through the author guidelines very clearly to figure out how will the editors consider your work. look at the important points specifically on author responsibilities, how authorship principles are defined, whether a journal is promoting preprint sharing or not. Although preprint sharing is becoming very prevalent and done in most fields, some journals may not necessarily consider that an article that was deposited as a preprint could be of relevance to the journal. So really work through the author guidelines or the submission guidelines quite clearly to figure out whether there is any point that you may have to address in your cover letter as well. Working just very quickly through what the manuscript's journey is going to be. You've created your manuscript. You're very clear on how that meets up with the journal's requirements on how the manuscript should be structured. You've now worked through what the basic requirements are of not only the journal, but how editors also require you to present work, to structure work. So if the three questions that editors ask themselves are answered to a sufficient degree, meaning does this fit the aims and scope of the journal? Is this scientifically valid? Is it scientifically rigorous enough to meet the requirements for peer review? And also, is this novel enough to warrant being sent out to peer reviewers? Your article will be accepted, and it is then sent to external reviewers. The external reviewers may actually be also people on the editorial board, yet they're still regarded as external reviewers. The reviewers then will work through your entire article in the structure that I've explained before. In a very small number of cases, you'll get an accept immediately. In the vast majority of cases, you'll either get a recommendation for minor revisions or major revisions. Minor revisions will be along the lines of you have to make small adjustments, sometimes only grammatical adjustments, or you have to make small adjustments to the structure. You have to add a little bit of information here and there, or and this is the more likely outcome, you will get a recommendation on major revisions. And the major revisions could actually ask you to revisit significant parts of your research. It could actually ask you to retrace some of the steps that you did, add considerably more data, do more data analysis, change graphics, change tables, present your findings in a completely different way. The major revisions could be so extensive that you actually have to consider taking your article out of the peer review process, rewriting very extensive parts, redoing quite extensive parts of your research. At this part of your academic career as PhD students, obviously the immediate step, whether you are getting minor or major revisions, is go back to your supervisor, go back to all your authors, and then consider what other steps you should be taking. In having worked through the minor or the major revisions, you then draft a letter that you assess everything that you were asked to do, and then you draft a letter in which you decide, do you agree to the requests that were made for revisions? If no, then you can decide to withdraw your article, and if you decide it is worth your while to make the necessary changes to your article, that means you revise your article and it gets the revision gets submitted again to the journal, and then you might go through the same process where the editor assesses the revisions, and either the editor will decide this is not worth the journal's while, that the revisions were not up to the standard, and then the article can be rejected at that point, or it can be sent back to reviewers. And important to know, it can actually be sent back to reviewers a number of times. Most journals will decide to limit the number of revision cycles to 2 or 3. Sometimes it can be more. Journals tend to be sometimes a little bit more lenient when they're looking at very young researchers, when they're looking at PhD students or postdocs, and saying that we have to allow them a little bit more space to go through more revision cycles before the work is either accepted or rejected. But on really big and important journals, that is usually not the case. So it is important to look very, very closely at what is being done, what is being asked of you in the revision stage before you go further. So once you've convinced an editor that your work is valid for the journal, it fits the aims and scope of the journal, it is scientifically rigorous, it is sufficiently original to be put through peer review, then it goes into the peer review process. Normally speaking, the peer review process, or largely speaking, I should say, the peer review process is quite a positive process. It's a process of development. It's a process of helping an author to position their work as best as possible, or if it is found that there are some shortcomings, to correct that and present a better paper, improve your paper. But it also is quite a daunting process, obviously. First of all, the idea of putting it out for external review is in order for very specialized people to give you an opportunity to improve your paper as much as possible. Sometimes also, as I mentioned earlier, to retrace the steps that you undertook in your research before writing your article, to revisit parts of your research, and that's part of the daunting process, that you have to revisit what you did, look at that anew. The peer review process is also designed very much to ensure that relevant work is being published. I mentioned before that your paper could be scientifically very sound, it could be a very well written paper, but that it just contributes absolutely nothing or very little to the body of knowledge, because a lot of papers on the very same topic have been published before. So to that end, the peer review process is also very much designed to ensure that relevant work, up-to-date work, new work is being entered into the body of knowledge, and not the same thing again. And it is finally intended very much to advance the field with the work that you're going to be presenting to another audience. I mentioned earlier that you'll get back at one point a decision, and it's going to be either on minor revisions, but most likely it's going to be on major revisions. It is important to work very clearly through what is being asked of you to do. So summarize that for yourself. Try and look through the eyes of the reviewer through those comments at your article, and then once you've made your revisions, clearly state line by line, usually, what it was that you revised. Send back a manuscript that shows what you did, and not a manuscript without changes, because you have to demonstrate in each part where it was commented what you had to do, exactly what you did and how you did that. Now, the problem is quite a lot of the review comments that you get, and this has to do with the fact that, as mentioned earlier, editors are busy, but so are peer reviewers, that sometimes you can find that these comments are quite difficult to work through. You can sometimes feel that they're a little bit personal. Take a step back from that, consider whether they are really personal and whether they're just not written instead in blunt language. But if you find that they are really problematic, then first of all discuss that with colleagues, especially your colleagues who have published more than you have, to assess whether this goes a little bit beyond what you regard as should be acceptable within the peer review process. Check other articles as well where you see work of a similar nature got published, and whether you can see, because some journals have an open review process where all the review comments are published online together with the published article. Try and find out what was done there as well. And then importantly, if you think that what is being asked goes a little bit beyond the capabilities of the author group, whether that if the article is single authored only by you or by a group of authors, consider whether what is being asked actually may require another researcher to be pulled into the group of authors to get in more expertise from them. But then in some cases, you may really feel that what is being asked is not really fair. It could be that a reviewer asks to run a completely new data set where you think this is not really appropriate. This goes beyond what the scope of the article is. This extends very much what we did beyond what we set out to do. So look at that. Then also ask yourself, is there maybe a misunderstanding on the side of the reviewer who misunderstood what the scope was, and as a result of that requested you to make changes to the article that goes beyond what your scope was. It just could be that you find that the reviewer is treating you very unfairly, or even worse, in an unprofessional manner. Unfortunately, as a publisher, I can confirm that sometimes reviewers can go much beyond what is acceptable, use language that goes beyond being blunt, but quite crude language. You have to bear in mind, sometimes a reviewer can also look at a piece and then feels, well, this encroaches on what their own field is, and they're not at that point of writing an article like that, and then try and diminish an article that way. If you find that there are unacceptable things in the comments by a reviewer, it may be important to contact the editor and then in diplomatic but clear language explain what the problem is. I have to say, though, that this is sometimes the exception, that this will not happen in a lot of cases. Now, your article may have been extremely well structured. You convince the journal to accept it for review, and that of course creates the expectation that your article will be accepted for publication. That is not the case. I mentioned earlier the one journal that I, very large journal that I have with this year probably over 8,000 submissions, but we will only publish about 10% of that. When we accept articles for review, that is not the 10% that we're going to be publishing. In that journal, we probably accept around about 30 to 35%, depending on the year, of articles submitted to us for review, but only a small percentage of that then finally get published. So a lot gets rejected, and they get rejected for a whole host of reasons. And it is important to then start considering what your options are if your article gets rejected. Do you ask the journal to reconsider that? Sometimes a journal will reject an article and tell you that you have to revisit quite a lot, but you are allowed to resubmit it at a later point. That is one option for you, but there are also other options. At Springer, we have what is called the Springer Nature Transfer Desk. So if your article gets rejected in a journal, and if it is scientifically sound, but it just doesn't meet aims and scope or other requirements of the journal, then your article will be sent to the transfer desk. And the transfer desk, there you have a lot of topical experts who will help you find another journal within the Springer Nature portfolio, in which you can then present your work anew. And here too, we look at the same thing that I described earlier. Perhaps you presented your article to a journal that has a very narrow focus, whereas your work has a broader focus. And that's then very much the case what we can do with the transfer desk to try and find a journal with a correct focus, whether that is a smaller or broader focus than the journal you submitted to. Now, let's consider a very different outcome. In fact, your article went through the entire peer review process. You made the necessary changes after the revisions that you were requested to make, and your article then is accepted. As I mentioned at the very beginning, these are the very important points you have to work through, creating the best structure as is required by the journal. You have devised the best publication strategy in terms of how you position your work to the journal, how you communicate with editors on the validity of your work. But that is not, when the article is accepted and is published, that's not the end of it. You also need to remain the best communicator you can to bring your work to audiences. The journal will already help you by having a global publishing platform. Journal will already be helping you getting to international audiences or to local audiences, depending on what the focus of the journal is. But it's also up to you to keep on promoting your work as much as possible. That could mean that you are presenting your work at international conferences, and that means you can either present your work before you published your journal article, or after you had published your article, you still present it to different audiences. Now, very important for researchers is also to make use of social media. As young PhD students, you're in a very different position than I was when I started on my career, because at that point we had no social media. We had to rely on very different methods and very ineffective methods compared to social media, how to present our work. So don't shy away from using social media, whether you're looking at Twitter, at LinkedIn, at whatever form, Facebook, to send your news of the publication to various groups. And also maybe your institution, your university could make use of press releases. If you decide to do that, bear in mind that you usually need to make an announcement on the work before it gets published and not when it gets published, because quite a lot of media outlets do prefer to have a scoop on what is a forthcoming publication. But by all means, do make use of the many uses that you can to present your work. At Springer, we have one initiative called Shared It, and Shared It means that you can send a link to anybody of your work, and they can view your work on the screen, but they can't print it, and they can't take parts of that. But it is a very effective way of ensuring that people know about your work, even though they might not have access to that. At the top here, I show a link. You'll get this full presentation. By the way, everybody will get a PDF of all the slides. You can click on that, and at that website, a whole range of solutions are given that will help you create wider impact for your article. These are all easily accessible links that we have on our website. That will help you create better insight into what the process is, but also create better opportunities for promoting your work. Now, I appreciate having gone through, I believe, all of 54 slides, bombarded you with a huge amount of information. You probably at this point will have a lot of questions, so I will stop sharing my presentation. Let's see if that works.
Oh. Thank you so much, Dr. Shmu. I think that was very great. We never stop learning. We never stop learning. I know our students will benefit a lot, but even us, we never stop learning. It was very great, greatly structured and accommodative of different levels of competencies. That is what made it for me. It was really very, very accommodative and also addressed the three main topics of logical manuscript structure, efficient publishing strategy, and successful journal submission. I know, especially within the academic field, we always come through statements like publish or perish. We live with it. If you can't package it to a different target and diverse audience, you don't know it. These are what we always encounter and we live with it. And I'm very happy that all these aspects, one way or the other, they were covered. And this makes things easier for us. Thank you for going through it like that. What actually even made it for me was under the logical manuscript structure for the 4 key questions for the reader, which actually is the main element of research. Why did you do the study for the introduction? What did you do? Method? What did you find? Results? And how do the study advance the field, which goes to the discussion. I know even with our students, they are also given, they're equipped with the research and writing skills, but now to get the dimension from the publisher themselves, it was great, is the icing on the cake. We greatly appreciate. I like also the idea of the abstract being the face, like the face of the person. This is where really you can convince people. If you are well or unwell, somebody will read it from the face. From the word go, you enter their door. Thank you so much. Let me not go take it longer, but let me open it to colleagues, to participants, the students, colleagues alike, for the dialogue, for any clarifications, for comments, for questions. Colleagues, this session is open for discussions. Currently, the time is 11:50. We are exactly on time. Thank you, Doc, for just having it. It was very detailed, but you managed to have it within the time. So we are going to have the question and answers from this 11:50 to 12:10. So we have 20 minutes for any questions and answer, for some dialogue, some discussions. So colleagues, you will only show by a raise of hand, then we can have those put through. We will have maybe the first round of questions, and then we'll give the guest to respond, and then maybe we can have the last one. So the floor is open, colleagues, participants.
You can either put your question in the chat or just raise your hand, and please all questions on whatever aspect of the publishing process, also something that you think may not have been addressed, because even though I had a very high number of slides, obviously I can't cover every aspect. So anything that comes to mind, you're welcome. Can I perhaps pose a question myself? Is there anybody at this point who is in the process of writing an article, either on your own or with a group of authors? And if so, at what stage are you?
Yeah, especially from the students themselves. I know currently with our SGSP IRRM program, the students have started putting papers together. And of course, our students are still haven't gone to the second phase of data collection, so they are still studying. So quite a number of them, I know they were moving towards the review article. having already done some literature review. I think some of them, they can share experiences on how they are going and so on. And any other colleagues or students from other participating universities, and even colleagues alike.
Yeah, on the review article, I touched upon that at the beginning. I would say that for a student, it might be good, PhD student, it might be good to consider doing regional research articles instead of review, because for the review articles, the bar is set often very high. What we see in a lot of journals is that there sometimes is a misunderstanding on a review article, that a review article is often presented to us just as a summary of what is a review of what has been published, instead of review that also dives quite deeply from an analytical point of view into the knowledge. So be careful when writing a review article to not present it only as a literature review, but very importantly that it should it could be the component is quite different depending on the field, but some fields would require you for a review article to have up to 30–40% an analytical part and not only a review part of the body. I saw one hand and now, but unfortunately it's gone now. Sorry, I just raised my own hand.
Yes, there was a hand from one PhD student of our program at Tafila. Tafila.
Okay, thank you, Dr. Fraser, for your presentation. My question is on the special issues. How is the review process? Is it robust just as an ordinary submission? I would want to believe maybe a journal might be having a target to say, for a special collection, we need this number of articles. What happens if the journal doesn't really meet it? How is this affected maybe the number of articles that are being accepted or rejected? I heard you mention about some metrics to say maybe 10% of submissions in a year might be accepted. How is this different, maybe in a special call for submissions? Thank you.
Phila, thank you for that question. That's a very valid one, because quite often there is a misunderstanding on how the review process is conducted for special issues. I can only speak for Spring and Nature journals, but the policy for the Spring and Nature journals is that articles for special issue are reviewed exactly as for any other article. So it is as robust. It cannot be less robust. The rule that we have for the special issues, by and large, is that a special issue is proposed to the journal. If it's then accepted, then the review process needs to be conducted using, again, external peer reviewers. It cannot be reviewed only by the guest editors of the journal, and so we don't have different levels of quality in peer review between special issue articles and regular articles. Then when it comes to the point of the number of articles we have in there, so if, for instance, a special issue proposal that was accepted, we said we need between 15 and 20 articles on average. If it turns out we have less than that number, then we end up having less than that number, because the rule is the bench line or the benchmark that we have for quality needs to be exactly the same. The minimum quality that we need for an article in a special issue is exactly the same as for a regular article. We don't go for a lower quality standard. So if we have a couple of articles that don't meet the quality standard, and that means we have less articles in the special issue than we initially agreed to, then that's the case. But we won't accept articles just to make that minimum number. Yeah, and some have a lower quality standard. That is never done. So any article in special issue needs to meet all and every of the quality requirements that we have for any other article in the journal. I hope that answers your question, but if not, please indicate.
Hello, Tafila. Okay, thank you so much. Thank you, Doc. I think, of course, we always try to we set the bar very high. That's why even for our students, we try to assimilate them into the research and publication culture as early as possible in their studies, to the extent that don't be that surprised. Some of them are already talking about the review articles. Of course, with some of them, we have already experienced the challenge, because at that early stage, it's not that easy, but we are very happy we are getting there. But I think we have noted all these. I will ask a question. I see there's a hand for Dr. Matlodi. Before I give to her, of course, I will want to touch on the plagiarism check softwares. Like you talk about the Authenticate, we also have Turnitin, Plug Scan, and so on. Just to get an appreciation as one of the high-tier publishers, do you also have maybe some way of availing the softwares also to research institutions, help them with maintaining the softwares as a one of quality assurance from the conveyor belt there as much as possible? I think maybe you'll take this with that which will come from Dr. Matlodi. Let me give her the opportunity. Dr. Matlodi?
Yes, thank you, Chair. Good morning, everyone. Thank you so much, Dr. Fries, for that comprehensive presentation. I think my question is in relation to especially the data usage when publishing. For example, if you have maybe, or writing a thesis for the benefit of those who are working on their thesis, and you maybe have about 5 objectives, and you use this, maybe the data that you generated on objective 1 to in other objectives. How then, or what is the Springer Nature's point in terms of how many publications you can get out of that kind of setup? Is it that you can only publish one article using that data, or can you also use the very same data maybe to, because most of the time, especially those who are working with models, what happens is you will have data that generated in objective 1, and you're going to use that very same data in objective maybe 2 or 3. Are you able to maybe use the same data to publish your following objectives? I just wanted to understand the Springer Nature point of view, or standing with regards to that. Thank you.
Thanks, Dr. Matlodi. Nice meeting you, and also thank you for that very valid question. The point on data usage is to ensure that an article that let me answer it in a different way. There's one term that you might have seen before, where publishers refer to the salami technique of publishing research. And that is where you have a certain project and then decide, I'm going to cut this up into as many pieces in order to have as many articles as possible. That is where the point of repeated data usage comes in. And that is a point where publishers then usually, or journals will usually say, there wasn't a logic to cutting up this article in several pieces, because it would have been more logical to include everything in one go. Because you are presenting the same results again and again. So that is the cutting off point. If the question is, you're presenting the same results again and again, but you're just putting that, putting a different hat or different jacket, so to speak, on the result. on the data usage. That's an incorrect way of doing that. However, if these are different focuses within the same research project, I used in the one slide I had the example of the water membrane. If the data usage that underpins that is about the water membrane used, if one part is the usage of the water membrane, if another part that is aimed at a completely different audience, say the one part will be used for professionals and practitioners, or for people developing in industry, developing the water membrane. That's one article, but a completely different article in a journal with a completely different audience, where you will talk about the chemical composition of the membrane, and that is done for a completely different audience and for different, even for different application. That is completely valid. There you have data usage that's used in completely different contexts, perhaps even unrelated contexts. But if your article is going to be written for, by and large, the same audiences, different journals covering the same thing, that's where the problem comes in. But it is very difficult for authors sometimes to make a distinction between is there sufficiently substantial difference in audiences and application that warrants a different article, or not? And in a case like that, it is good sometimes to get in touch with a journal, with an editor, and present to them what the different articles will be, to get some advice. But by and large, the dividing line will be if you talk about the same data usage but different applications, different audiences, then you're fine. I hope that answers the question. Thank you.
Okay. And on the plagiarism check, do you have any means of maybe helping or meeting research institutions some halfway in terms of quality assurance at the levels who feeds into your publications?
Yeah, on that point, that's a difficult one to answer, because the plagiarism check that is the software that we use is software that is not owned by us. So we pay a license to make use of that software, and any university or any institute this is publicly available. This is market available software. So any institute can get a license themselves to use that. I would, however, say it's not necessary to put your article through an authenticate or turn it in, or whatever software there is, in order to check that, because that is something that a researcher should know beforehand, how much similarity there should be or shouldn't be between what they publish and what somebody else has published. If somebody put the article together in the correct way, and if the correct references were made, if permissions were obtained for text that is used, or for graphs or for tables or something, then there isn't really a need for the author themselves to put the article through a software check.
Okay. Thank you, Doc. That's great. I know I will go to Concepta. His hand is up, but let me just check on the chat. I know there are some comments there. There was a comment by one, I think it's Victoria. I am busy with a review paper at the stage of incorporating my supervisor's comments. I can say that it is really quite a process. I think it's just to appreciate that review papers are high-level packaging for publications.
Yes.
There's
Indeed,
also
indeed.
Yeah, there's also a question from Horata Samuel. Does a reprint has an impact on the next submission in case your article gets rejected? What is your take on reprint? I think maybe you can take this one from Horata Samuel before I go to the two hands which I've seen, which then more or less will close this question and answer.
Sure, sure. Victoria, thanks for your comments. I'm really happy to hear your supervisors working with you on that, because a review process, a review article is a challenging piece to write, but you also learn a tremendous amount about writing a review article. So I think it is very good that you do that. And then Samuel, on the case of preprint. So I can talk probably an hour about the preprints. I'll try and do that in 2 minutes. Preprints are now super important. They in most fields, they've become really a very important part of the entire process of disseminating research. At Springer, we are very much promoting the use of preprints. When an article gets submitted to one of our journals, the author gets a question: do you want to post a preprint of your article on Research Square? So we own the initiative called Research Square, or the tool called Research Square. Research Square does two things. One thing is it creates an author dashboard where you can see exactly which process your article is in the entire process between submission and end of review. But Research Square also is our preprint platform where you can publish, have a preprint done. Very important to know, and this applies to almost all publishers, when you opt to have a preprint published, it cannot be revoked. That has to do with maintaining the integrity of the publication record, because say you in the process of revision discover major errors that you had in your research, and you now go and correct them and then publish the paper, it cannot be the case that the preprint is removed with the errors. The integrity of the entire research process needs to be very much maintained. However, if your article gets rejected in a journal, that does not have impact on resubmitting your article elsewhere. Unless you get to a journal, but that is very infrequently that happens. A very small number of journals at the moment have a policy where they say if your article is linked to a preprint, then we choose not to consider your article for review. That is happening less and less. But the rule on the whole is if your article was rejected, then it can be submitted elsewhere, and the fact that that there's a preprint has nothing to do with that. It doesn't impact negatively on your on resubmitting it elsewhere. So you needn't be worried about that. The one thing that is important to check is that in Research Square, that is very much the case. When you submit an article, you say, yes, I want a preprint, then there will be a line at the top. As soon as your article is accepted for review, it will say under review. If it is rejected for review, then that line will disappear, but it won't say rejected. It only shows under review, or there's no text. So there's no worry about that.
Thank you so much, Dr. Fitz. Let me take Concepta, then Nakale, and Jela in that order. I think then I will close this session. You can come through, Concepta.
Hello. Thank you so much, Dr. Fritz, for that wonderful presentation. And for me, it has come at the right time because this is when I want to start writing my article. But then my question comes to make a follow-up on Dr. Mantodi's question. That is on if I have 3 objectives and then I want to write like 2 articles from there. So can I use the same biodata that I have for the 2 articles? Thank you.
Well, in principle, yes, because the objectives are, I would assume, related because they come from the same research project, but they also are independent to a degree of one another. So if you feel that these objectives each warrant a different article, then do go ahead and write different articles. What could be a good idea is that you just reference the other article as well, but then reference it if it is valid, if there's relevancy in that. But if you really feel that the two objectives are sufficiently independent of one another to write an article, then there needn't be a problem.
Okay, Doc. Thank you so much.
Does that answer your question? Okay, and yes, good luck, Concepta. It's great. It's great that you're at the point of starting to write that. Good luck and a lot of success.
Thank you so much.
Thank you. Thank you, Concepta. Thank you, Doc. Let's hear from Nakale Angela.
Good morning, everyone. Thank you so much, Dr. Chris, for your presentation. It is indeed informative. I have a question, not on the academic end, but rather more from the industry side. Can you hear me well?
It's a little bit faint, but go ahead, please.
Right, I'm in a noisy place. So my question is more on the industry side, where we deal with technical reports, and we would like to sort of convert this into useful publications. When I take you back to one of your first few slides that speaks to the type of publication, where would this fit in well? Where is the best place to utilize this kind of technical reports and convert them into useful publication material?
Okay, okay, Angela, thank you for that question. I'm not sure I heard everything correctly. I understood that you are interested mostly on technical reports and wanted to know where best to publish that. So if not, please just in that chat rewrite the question again. My apologies for not hearing well. Technical reports, a lot of journals find them very important, but at the same time, a lot of journals exclude them. So it is very important to when you consider doing a technical report, to go and look at what the article types are that a journal publishes. Not all journals very clearly in their author guidelines or the submission guidelines will write which article types they consider. So in that case, first look at what was published in the article for the last 2 to 3 years. If you still feel that journal is the best, will deliver the best audiences for the technical report, I would say in that case, write to the editor-in-chief and ask them whether they would consider doing a technical report, and then just give a short explanation of what the technical report is about, and also the importance of having the technical report in that journal, because this is a little bit the thing that I discussed in the cover letter, where you always have to make a link. You're selling your article, in fact, to an audience. Make the link between the importance of your work for the journal and for the audiences. But apologies if I couldn't hear everything, because the sound quality wasn't good. And if I'm misunderstood, you're also welcome you'll see my address at the end to write the question to me, then I can write to you a little bit longer.
Thank you, Dr. Fries, and thank you, colleagues. Also, I think it's to appreciate that Dr. Fries has also pledged that he will share the slides at the end, and he has also availed himself for any one-on-one follow-ups. So he will always be there for us going forward. I know this will be mostly my last talking, but it's just to thank you, Dr. Fries. We'll keep in touch. I think this is the beginning of a journey with Springer Nature. At this time, just allow me to give to the Secretariat for the reflections and evaluation of the publication clinic. I think this will take about 5 or so minutes before we move to the closing by the Acting Director of the SASCAL Graduate Studies Program in IWRM, Ms. Renee Munyai. So, Christine, I think I hand to you in terms of administering the reflections and the evaluation of the publication clinic.
Thank you so much, Professor Mwalafi, and also thank you very much, Dr. Fritz, for that presentation. I learned quite a lot, and I'm sure everybody here can attest that it was very informative, and they also learned a lot. The section that we are entering into now is just the evaluation of the publication clinic. I'll just post a link in the chat box again, and then I'm just kindly asking the participants to complete the evaluation form so that we can just henceforth improve our seminars, public lectures, and so forth. All right, the document or the link is now posted on the chat box. If I may kindly just ask the participants to just complete that. It will just take not more than 4 minutes. Thank you so much. Apart from just completing the evaluation form, if there's any other questions, reflections, comments, you are more than welcome to raise your hand, or you can also just put it in the chat box.
Thank you, Christine. Okay, colleagues, I think we are more or less done with the evaluation. And those who are still completing it, we can still have our director giving the closing remarks while we are finishing that aspect. Let me call upon our SGSP IWRM director, Ms. Renee Munyanyi, to give a closing remarks for this meeting. Over to you, Ms. Rennie.
Thank you so much. I was contemplating between switching on my camera, but I've got a very dark background, so I'm not sure if there is any added value of having my camera on. Dr. Fritz Schmoll, I hope I've pronounced your name correctly. I had to go on Google to rehearse how to pronounce it. I think it's of German origin. But either way, I really want to extend my heartfelt gratitude for such an enlightening webinar. This particular research publication clinic, I think, was insightful for researchers across the whole spectrum. The insights you shared were incredibly useful, and I think they will guide not just our students, but even professionals on how to navigate the world of research publications. So my deepest appreciation to you for a very insightful session. But I would really want to extend also my appreciation to the participants who have taken the time to join this webinar. Your enthusiasm in asking questions and engaging with our expert facilitator really added value to this particular event, making it quite enriching for everyone that is involved. But I always say behind every event, there's always a team of soldiers behind the scenes, led by Professor Benson Malafi. Prof, thank you so much for leading the SGSP team, as well as the Directorate of Research, Innovation and Partnerships at the Namibia University of Science and Technology for co-convening this particular session. Without that platform, I think I would have missed out on this collaborative platform to engage and learn from a renowned speaker in this space. So my appreciation to the team behind the scenes. But as we conclude the session, colleagues, let's carry forward the wisdom and insights that we have gained today and apply them to our own research endeavors. I'm quite confident that the lessons shared by Dr. Fritz Schmal will serve as a guiding light for each and every one of our scholarly pursuits. Thank you, everyone, for being a part of this wonderful webinar, and I wish you all a pleasant day ahead. Over to you, Chair.
Thank you so much, Rennie, and Dr. Mabuku. I see your hand. You want to say something? Okay, that's fine. Thank you so much, Miss Rennie, my director. And of course, the appreciations have been expressed, the colleagues. It was very great. Thank you, Dr. Fries, colleagues. This is the end of the webinar. Thank you so much. Have a great day.
From my end, oops, I'm perhaps too late, but from my end, a big thank you to Ms. Rennie for your very kind words. It really is a delight for me to be able to speak to young researchers, because they're going to be our authors of tomorrow and create new and exciting work for everybody in their field. So it's really a great pleasure to speak to everybody, and I hope some of what I present it would be of help to them. Big thank to Dr. Malafi for having approached me to invite me. I'm really delighted. I hope we can have a repeat of this. I mentioned you will all get the presentation. I will send a PDF to Dr. Malafi, who will send that to everybody. My contact details are at the end, and once again, please do not hesitate to contact me for any questions you may have. I was once a young researcher, and I know that journals can be very scary things. The publication process can be very scary. There's a huge amount to learn, and in this presentation, I could only teach you a very, very small amount of what you should know. So please don't be shy, and don't be reluctant to send me any questions you may have. And I wish everybody really great success with their research. The topics that you're doing research on are very close to my heart, because I publish quite a lot on water-related matters. And in particular, the area that you come from, to have PhD students working on these topics, for me, it's of huge importance. My surname may be German. I'm not, but originally I am one of your neighbors. I was born and raised in South Africa, although I've lived in Europe for a long time now. I'm super familiar with the many water-related problems you have. So to be able to give an author workshop to students working on one of the most crucial resources in Southern Africa, for me, is just fantastic and a big honor. And thank you very much.
Thank you so much, Doc. Thank you so much. And colleagues, I can see that we had some challenges with the evaluation form. I would ask colleagues that will share it through email so that people can still attend to it, evaluate the webinar. We very much apologize for that technical glitch, and we hope you'll support us by working on it outside this forum. Thank you so much. Thank you. Thank you. Bye-bye.
Thank you, everybody. Bye-bye. Bye.
Thank you so much. Bye.
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 Bye.